This is Colin O'Keefe here for LXBN TV. It was recently announced that lobbyists will now be permitted to sit on federal advisory committees, boards, and commissions, a stark reversal by the Obama administration. Joining me now to explain exactly how this happened is attorney Zack Parks. He is with Covington Burling, an author on the firm's blog, Inside Political Law. Zack, first, as I mentioned, can you explain for us exactly how all of this happened? I know President Obama stated early and often in his presidency that he wanted to keep lobbyists out of roles like this. So what are the machinations at play that led to this decision?
Thanks, Colin. First, thanks for having me on. Stepping back, keeping lobbyists out of kind of positions of influence in DC has been a major priority for the Obama administration kind of from the beginning. In fact, on his first full day in office, he signed an executive order that prohibited lobbyists from serving in appointed positions in his administration, and then also prohibited lobbyists that were leaving his administration from going on and lobbying the executive branch for the duration of the Obama presidency. There were also restrictions on gifts from lobbyists and things like that. And so this restriction barring lobbyists from serving on federal advisory committees was kind of adding upon that, and another means of kind of keeping lobbyists out of influencing or undue influence in DC. Shortly after the ban was introduced in 2010, a group of lobbyists filed a lawsuit in federal court in Washington, D.C., and they alleged that by barring them from serving on federal advisory committees, they were being restricted in being able to influence their First Amendment rights to petition the government. And that court case went up to the D.C. Circuit, and the D.C. Circuit agreed that their First Amendment rights and Fifth Amendment rights had been impinged upon because they were being denied a benefit, the opportunity to serve on a federal advisory committee, and they were being denied that benefit because they were exercising their First Amendment right to petition the government. And so the D.C. Circuit sent that case back down to the D.C. District Court to find out whether the government's rationale for impinging upon that right was strong enough to justify it. And so I think at that point the government kind of saw the writing on the wall, recognized that they were probably going to ultimately lose. And so OMB issued this new guidance, which came out this week, that restricts federal lobbyists, that now allows some federal lobbyists to sit on some federal advisory committees. And they drew a distinction between those that are serving in an individual capacity, kind of serving on behalf of the government as essentially special government employees, and those that are representing outside interests like environmental groups or corporations or trade associations. And those that are representing outside groups, even if they are lobbyists, can now serve on these federal advisory committees.
I see. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. And then second, when you wrote about this on Inside Political Law, you mentioned that there's a way for everyday people to get a sense for what roles these lobbyists might eventually fill. Can you share with us then just how people can find out where these lobbyists might exactly end up, what positions are open, and so forth?
That's right. And as I mentioned, there's kind of these two categories. There's the individual capacity lobbyists who are still prohibited from sitting on advisory committees. And then there's the representative capacity lobbyists who are sitting in a representative capacity seat on an advisory committee, and they are now allowed. And if you read through the guidance, it looks like it's very murky and very difficult to understand whether a particular seat on a particular advisory committee is an individual capacity seat or a representative capacity seat. There's a multiple factor test that's used, relying on Office of Government Ethics opinions. And it's just not always very, very clear. For example, you cannot just look to the charter for the advisory committee or the enabling language of the statute to see if it uses the word represent. The example that's given in one Office of Government Ethics advisory is that if a seat on an advisory committee is for a representative with expertise in the natural sciences selected from a college or university, even though it uses the word representative, that person is probably not a person serving in a representative capacity. So it seems very difficult. And for some reason, OMB did not refer to this, but there's actually a website that you can go to that distinguishes between individual capacity lobbyists and representative capacity lobbyists. And it's facadatabase.gov, F-A-C-A database.gov. And what that does is if you can go to that database, it tells you who is sitting on a particular advisory committee, and it tells you whether that seat is a special government employee seat, which in most cases that person is going to be an individual capacity lobbyist who's prohibited from serving, or a representative seat, in which case a person who is a lobbyist can now sit on that seat. And the reason the government keeps that database and already makes a distinction between the two is because representative individuals that are serving in a representative capacity on a federal advisory committee are subject to less stringent ethics rules than those that are serving in their individual capacity. So the federal government already tracks this. And so if you're a lobbyist or you're a corporation or a trade association wanting to know whether a particular federal advisory committee has a seat that's open to lobbyists, you can just jump onto that website, facadatabase.gov, and that should give you a pretty good idea about whether that's permissible or not.
Interesting. Yeah, this will be fascinating to watch to see in the end what the ultimate impact is. Once again, that was attorney Zack Parks of Covington and Burling. To read more of his insight on this developing story, be sure to visit InsidePoliticalLaw.com. Thank you for joining me today, Zack.
Thank you, Colin.